Welcome. Thank you for joining our Governance, Risk, and Compliance Best Practice Series webinar. I'm Becky Melody, your hostess for today's presentation. Diane Gleinzer, our VP of Operations, will be presenting. If you do not see the presentation slides on your screen at this point, please click on the Annex 11 tab at the top center of your screen. The discussion today will cover introductions, USDM at a glance, webinar logistics, and our discussion topic, the updated Annex 11, what does it mean for computer systems validation? Diane Gleinzer is our VP of Operations for US Data Management, and she has 21 years of experience in quality assurance and regulatory compliance within pharmaceutical, biotech, and medical device industries. Diane is our lab practice director, and she leads the USDM operations team, and she's done so successfully for 8 years now. US Data Management is focused exclusively on the life science domain. We're the market leader in providing IT, quality, and regulatory compliance professional service solutions. We're headquartered in Ventura, California, and we're a compliance partner for many best-of-breed vendors, including SAP and Oracle, OpenText, and Agilent Technologies. We've delivered more than 1,000 successful projects with over 130 life science clients, and we're a preferred compliance partner for small, mid-tier, and large life sciences companies. We specialize in assisting clients with reducing regulatory risk while maximizing their investment in quality systems and ECM, laboratory instruments as well as systems, and IT infrastructure. Our directive is to simplify, unify, and optimize compliance and business objectives. The content of the presentation will be covered in approximately 30 minutes, and we'll invite you to post questions for our team via the iLink message board on the bottom left of your screen. We'll address all questions immediately following the presentation, but feel free to put them in as they come to you through the slide presentation, and if something strikes you, just go ahead and enter it, and we'll get started right after Diane's finished to answer your questions. If you're having any issues logging into the system, I suggest you turn off your pop-up blockers. And so you know, the webinar is being recorded and will be made available on our website if you want to review the slides later and to keep you from taking tons of notes through the session. The overall goal of the webinar is to facilitate discussion. We're here to share ideas and provide the platform, and then get to the edge and explore solutions together. Thanks again for taking the time to join us. And now I'll turn the presentation over to Diane.
Hello, everyone, and thanks again for joining us today. On this webinar, we'll be discussing what Annex 11 is, just very briefly for those of you who aren't very familiar with it, the changes that were made to Annex 11 recently that went into effect that affect computer system validation, validation of applications under Annex 11, IT infrastructure, additional information on that. Now IT infrastructure qualification is a requirement, and how to qualify the IT infrastructure, the risk management element that's been introduced into Annex 11, current good practices, documentation, which is Chapter 4 of Annex 11, which was also updated and went into effect at the same time. Excuse me, this will discuss, pardon me, some of the documentation that's required now for computer systems validation. The update to supplier services and how to handle them in a validation of a system. And then we'll discuss just an overall summary. And again, at the end of this presentation, we will have question and answers. So please do feel free to add any questions during the presentation. So what is Annex 11? Basically, it's a European equivalent of in the U.S., the Part 11 requirements. It was first released in 1992. In 2008, a revision was proposed to bring Annex 11 more into compliance with the increased use of computer systems and the complexity of those systems. That new guideline was introduced in 2011, and it became effective on July 1st of this year. Annex 11 is for those companies who are based in the United States and who want to sell in Europe. It's also, so if you're in the United States and you're selling solely, for your products selling solely in the United States, you need to follow Part 11. If, however, you are based in Europe and you're selling in Europe, you need to meet the Annex 11 requirements. If you are based in the United States and you want to sell in Europe, you also have to comply with Annex 11 as well as Part 11. So the changes to Annex 11 that affect computer systems validation, first of all, there's a requirement now that you must validate your applications. You must qualify IT infrastructure. Validation does not stop with a one-time validation event. They've expanded the validation lifecycle in Annex 11, and that means you must maintain the validated state of your system. Requirements must be traceable throughout the validation lifecycle. Traceability has always been a regulatory expectation, but now it's actually a regulatory requirement. You must be able to demonstrate that your data has integrity, it's available, and it's confidential. Vendor audits are a requirement now. When you do a vendor audit, you need to consider risk. We'll talk about that in a bit more detail later on. They also are now subject to inspection during a regulatory audit. Risk management for CSV. We all know risk management has become an issue in the United States, and it's an expectation now under Part 11 and under the predicate rules. Annex 11 extends that to the European Union. And the Chapter 4 changes, which are critical to the understanding and to computer systems validation. You now must define electronic raw data. There's no such thing any longer as an electronic system generating a paper record, and only that paper record is raw data. If you have an electronic system that generates a paper record, that electronic file is required to be a part of the raw data and has to be maintained. So you need to keep and manage all electronic records now. There's an addition in Annex 11 of IT infrastructure qualification. It's always been expected that you would qualify your infrastructure, but it's never really been looked at or regulated. Now Annex 11 says all forms of computerized systems used as a part of GXP regulated activities must be controlled and qualified. And where a computerized system replaces a manual operation, there can be no resultant decrease in product quality, process control, or quality assurance, and no increase in the overall risk of the process. Again, you need to validate your computer systems applications, you need to validate your infrastructure, and this applies across the board as a part of GXP regulated activities. So what does qualification of infrastructure mean under Annex 11? And really, this is not so much different than what it means in the United States. It's just Annex 11 just gives you a bit more detail on it. So it means you need to bring your infrastructure into initial conformance with the established standards, and you establish those standards based on good practices within the industry. You need to have a planned, documented verification process based on good IT practices. And you need to maintain that qualified state by having sufficient processes and QA activities in place to demonstrate that your processes and activities are effective in maintaining a validated state. You need to make sure that user IDs are unique to an individual and not reused. A lot of this, you'll see this is very similar to Part 11 requirements. You need to implement adequate password controls, establish user roles and permissions, making sure that only authorized people can make changes to your system. And you need to control changes to the system, including how they're configured and changes to the infrastructure. And control of changes means you need to know what you have to start with. You need a baseline. And so you need system architecture diagrams and descriptions. You need a list of the applications that are being supported on your infrastructure. You need documented assurance that the underlying network infrastructure is actually capable of supporting the validated applications that are being housed on that infrastructure. You need to make sure that your IT staff, as well as your technical staff, your scientists and other staff, are adequately trained to operate the network system. Again, need to make sure that support procedures are in place to ensure and maintain data integrity and security, and you need to test those support procedures to verify that they're effective. And you need to look at them periodically and make sure that they continue to be adequate, that they continue to be effective, and that they continue to state what you're actually doing. Risk management under Part 11 or under Annex 11 needs to be applied throughout the life cycle of the computerized system. And it should take into account patient safety, data integrity, and product quality. That's always been under the predicate rules. Those are the things that you need to look at. As part of this risk management system, you need to make decisions based on the extent of how much validation and how many controls that you need to put into place. That needs to be based on a justified and documented risk assessment of the system that you're looking at. And really, you need to apply risk management across the board for all of your corporate processes and procedures. But specifically, they're talking now about validation of systems and how you're going to ensure that your data is maintained and that it has integrity across the board for the life cycle of that system. Does that mean you have to go to the nth degree? No, you need to justify it based on the patient safety, data integrity, and product quality. One of the keys to being able to interpret and understand Annex 11 is being able to apply risk management to your products and processes. You need, in order to do that, you need an understanding of what those products and processes are. If you have that understanding, then you'll be able to develop an adequate and appropriate control to ensure that product quality, safety, and data integrity are maintained. Regulated companies need to be able to justify what standards, protocols, and acceptance criteria, those procedures and processes that you have documented, and what records you require based on an analysis and an assessment of the risk involved. In developing this standard, the European Union has aligned itself closely with the Quality Risk Management, ICH procedure, as well as GAMP5. And these things have been in place for quite a while. They've just aligned themselves with this. So they're really getting to a point now where good practices for systems have been incorporated into this updated regulation. So you'll see that the updated Annex 11 has harmonized with much of the GAMP5 terminology. It describes life cycle phases, roles and responsibilities for validation of computer systems. They've clarified and built on the vendor and supplier roles and the vendor and supplier responsibilities and activity that GAMP5 has quite a bit of detail around. This is reflecting an increasing role of IT service providers and the increased dependence on supplier activities and documentation when you're validating a computer system. So now you take your quality system and audit information for suppliers into account when you're validating the system, and you don't have to duplicate the effort that that supplier has already put in to do the testing necessary for the system. Excuse me, it allows you to focus your effort more closely on testing of your intended use and not repeating what the vendor's already done. But this audit information that you generate when you do a vendor audit of your supplier, again, this now is required to be made available to an inspector during an audit. Other best practices that are now addressed in the regulation is maintaining an up-to-date GXP system inventory. So an inventory of all the applications, of all the pieces of your network that have any GXP applicability. And what the system does that has GXP applicability. So what is it that that system is doing for you? You need to formally assess and document that your automated testing tools and test environments. So if you have a validation environment, if you have a separate test environment, those environments that you consider to be under control need documentation around them, as well as any testing tools that you're using. You need to show documented evidence that it's in control. And you need to periodically evaluate your computer system to verify, first of all, that it's still, after all the changes you've implemented, that that system is still under control, that you're still using it for the original intended use, and that you haven't changed the intended use of your system, that it remains in a validated state and continues to be compliant with business needs and regulations. So this is a new regulation. It's always been recommended that you do periodic system reviews. Now it's required if you have to comply with Annex 11. At first look, Annex 11 is really focused on the increased requirements around the computer systems, but at the same time the updated Annex 11 was released, they released a new version of Chapter 4, which is documentation. And that update focuses on the documentation requirements for computer systems validation. Annex 11 is it's far more detailed and prescriptive around what's actually required than Part 11 was. Part 11 it says what you have to get at the end of the day, that you need the documented evidence, but it doesn't really tell you what evidence you need or how to get that. And Annex 11 offers a bit more meat to let you know how you need to comply. Under the records definition, documentation can exist in a variety of forms. It can be paper, electronic form, it can be photographic media, anything that you store that's related to that system or to the data is now documentation. The records can still be hybrid. You may still have some elements that are electronic and others that are paper. But the records now, as we discussed a little bit earlier, include the raw data used to generate other records. So a lot of companies that I've been in over the past years have said, well, we're using the computer system, but it's not our system of records, so we don't have to validate it. We actually have paper, and that hard copy is our system of record. Well, under Annex 11, you are no longer allowed to just negate the fact that you have electronic records. You can still have hard copies that are your system of record, but the electronic files that are used to create that hard paper copy must be maintained, and that computer system must be validated. Regulated users are required to define which data are to be used as raw data. But all data, regardless of whether it's electronic media, paper, photographs, all the media we described before, on which that quality decision is based, must be defined as raw data. A complex system must be understood, it must be well documented, it must be validated, and must have adequate controls in place. And the company, you as a regulated company, are required to be the people that define what adequate control is. For electronic documents, templates, forms, and master documents should be implemented. So if you have reports, you need to go ahead and start working on templates and defining forms and master documents that will be consistent throughout your process. You need to make sure that you have appropriate controls in place, again, to ensure the integrity of the record. And the record, again, is any sort of media that you're using, to make sure that you maintain and ensure the integrity of that record throughout the retention period. Chapter 4 requirements for electronic records and e-signatures are not as detailed nor as prescriptive as FDA's Part 11, especially around e-signatures, but they are at a high level in line with Part 11. For suppliers and service providers, there really aren't any brand new concepts, but that section was expanded just to sort of add clarification around what's required. When you use a third party, and I'm not sure what a third art is, looks like we lost a couple letters there, but a third party to provide, install, configure, integrate, validate, maintain, modify, or retain a computerized system or related service, or you use them for data processing, you must have a formal agreement in place now between the manufacturer and the third party. And the agreements need to clearly state what the responsibilities of that third party are. So if you use an outsourced supplier to validate your system, you need an agreement in place that clearly defines responsibilities. If you bring in an implementation team to implement your system, you must have an agreement in place that clearly defines roles and responsibilities. Again, any quality management system or supplier audits need to be made available to inspectors. And the need to audit a supplier or service provider needs to be based on risk. You'll hear risk assessment brought in over and over again, and not just when it concerns Annex 11, but it's in Part 11 now. It's in the predicate rules now. Over and over again, risk is an integral part. Risk management, risk assessment is an integral part of what you have to do in computer systems validation. There is an increased emphasis on ensuring that you document your risk assessment and the GXP impact of requirements and risks to the system itself. Again, you need to make sure that user requirements are traceable throughout the life cycle of the system. So as you update the system, as you make changes to the system, that user requirements document needs to be updated, and you need to maintain the traceability of where it's tested, where it's verified to be met. And again, you want to focus your traceability on those requirements with the highest risk to product quality, data integrity, and patient safety. Annex 11 increases the focus on strategy for testing, including when you should do negative testing, boundary testing, challenge testing in order to identify defects in the system. And you need to be prepared during an audit to defend the adequacy of your validation approach. So this goes back to the validation plan. When you're planning that approach, you need to make sure that it's justified, well documented what you did and why you did it, so that during an audit, you have that information on hand. Again, automated testing tools and test environments need to have documented assessments for their adequacy. And this is reflective of the increasing use of automated tools in testing computer systems. When you define the approach to verifying adequacy, then you need to base that approach on risk. And if you're using tools to maintain your regulated records, again, base the approach that you take to maintenance of those tools on the overall risk of the system and a documented risk assessment. Data migration. If you're moving data from one version to another or from one format to another, make sure that you include checks that data are not altered in value and or meaning during that process. Again, that's very consistent with Part 11 on preserving content and meaning of records when you're copying or migrating them. When you have interfaces between systems, so you have an ERP system talking to your PLM system or a lab system talking to a LIMS system, there's a new clause in Annex 11 that says that interface design, it's aimed at interface design. It says computerized systems that exchange data electronically with another system should include appropriate checks for the correct and secure entry and processing of data in order to minimize the risk. What does that mean? That means that you need to make sure that data crossing that interface is not corrupted that it comes across as it was planned to come across. And when they're developing those interfaces, when they're designing those interfaces, they need to take into account what you need to use that interface for, and it must be designed and documented appropriately during the design phase. Data backup and restore. Again, this is very similar to Part 11. You can't have data with integrity, and you can't ensure the data safety unless you have adequate backup and restore procedures. And those procedures need to be validated now under Annex 11. So you must verify that backup and restore procedures work, and you need to monitor. So periodically you need to test that they work and ensure that they continue over time to accurately be able to restore that data to your system. Review of audit trails is new. We all know about audit trails. We all know these systems have to have them and what needs to be in them. However, during validation, the audit trail functionality needs to be verified, and I think most people do that now. But you also need to review those audit trails. If you have audit trails for a batch record, you need to review them as part of the batch record review. Audit trails need to be available and convertible to something that you can read so that you can regularly review them. And you need to have a procedure in place that documents when you will review them. Again, for batch records, they strongly recommend, and it's part of the regulation now, that you review them as a part of the batch record review. Periodic evaluation, new clause in Annex 11, but it's always been part of good business practice and good computer systems practice to review the computer system periodically. You determine, based on system risk, how often you need to review the current status of validation for that computer system. And during that evaluation, you need to review the changes that have been made over time. You need to review any help desk records, any system issues that have occurred, and overall what you're looking for is some sort of documented assurance in the form of a report at the end of this periodic evaluation that says the system remains under compliance and remains in a validated state, or documents what needs to be done to bring it back into a validated state. So just before we wrap up, a little side note. I've talked to several companies who think, well, EU regulations don't affect me yet, so I don't really need to worry about this this record, electronic record. I can still go ahead under Part 11 requirements and state that my electronic system doesn't need to be validated, and I can just have paper records as my raw data. I don't need to worry about the electronic records. If you look on the FDA website, this is in reference to lab systems, to chromatography data systems, but it applies across the board. There is a statement that says a printed paper copy is not considered a true copy of an entire electronic raw data used to create a chromatogram as required by the predicate rule. So you might want to check that out on the FDA website, because it's really basically saying the same thing that we said under Annex 11, that no longer can you say a paper record is an adequate representation of the raw data of the system, and you still are going to have to validate your computer system and maintain the integrity and maintain the electronic records generated to produce that paper record. So in summary, again, Annex 11 became effective June 30th, 2011. It went into effect formally on July 1st. Much of the regulation has not changed substantially, but you do need to be well aware of those sections that have changed if you manufacture a product intended to be sold in the EU. And quite honestly, as the FDA formalizes its next opinion on Part 11 interpretation, they will likely rely on Annex 11 as part of their interpretation. And the most notable changes to be aware of are around the increased detail for documentation around computer systems and validation of those systems. There's a few references at the end of the slide deck. If anybody wants to get the slide deck, you're welcome to check out the references. And with that, Becky, I will hand this back to you.
Thanks so much, Diane. What a tremendous presentation. We will, as we mentioned, open the floor to questions now. Thank you to those of you who have already typed in questions for us there. Just want to remind you that this session has been recorded and it will be posted to our website. Typically takes about 24 hours to get the recorded session back and get it out there on the site, which is, of course, USDataManagement.com. You will find additional webinars there as well across the various practices that US Data Management specializes in, and happy to have you join us there if they apply to your particular realm. The first question that we have is from Kalyani, who asks, are the templates mandatory or are they guidelines?
I'm assuming, Kalyani, that you mean the templates that they're requesting for you to start developing. They are guidelines for now, but it's strongly recommended that you create templates and that you use them on your computer systems.
She's saying yes, that is what she indicated. So thank you, Diane. You're right on there. The second question from Kalyani says, do we need to verify backup and restore for every system to some extent if company is having global backup and restore procedure? Is it sufficient to verify at the procedure level once?
It's not sufficient to verify it once. During each validation of your computer system, you need to do whatever the policy says. So whether you add it to your backup plan and add it to your backup schedule, you still need to verify for each system that backup and restore is working. And again, you might do a global pick one system that you do every 6 months or something, but on a regular basis, on some basis, you need to verify for each validated system that backup and restore is working. And again, you can determine the periodicity of that, but you should do it for each system.
Tremendous. Thank you, Diane. We have a question from Michael. Let's see. Does the network infrastructure need to be qualified?
Yes, it does. Under Annex 11, it's now a requirement. It's always been a good business practice to do that. It's always been a good good validation practice. But now Annex 11 requires that the network infrastructure be qualified.
Thank you, Diane. Just so you know, we want to respond to the folks that sent us questions ahead of time. Someone called a guest says there are 2 questions that are on the Annex 11 registration page. Just so you know, we're going to address your question offline because it will be more lengthy and take a little more time than we have here today. The question is from a guest and says, looking forward to attending, gaining useful information, performing a 21 CFR Part 11 CSV. I have a central database with 3 servers connected, backup are performed daily and monthly, retained off-site for 30 days, the predicate rule for record retention. With my backup log suffice for validation? If yes, what do I need to include? If not, what must I do? Just wanted to let you know that we do have that question and we'll be responding to you directly. Diane and I will put something together and be in touch there with your answers. And the second guest that sent a question, they are attending the class responsible for computer system validation for installation qualifications and operational qualifications. Just wanting to let us know that those are questions and we'll certainly spend some time in addressing that as well. Here's one more question. Philip is asking, when do we need to validate the network?
It's a network qualification, so there is a difference. It's more of a documentation exercise, ensuring that you have the appropriate procedures and processes in place to support validated environments, and making sure that you've met at least minimum manufacturer's recommendations for installation of your hardware, for the operating system, and tracking that the operating system is sufficient to manage everything that you're going to house on those systems. And that should be done as soon as possible, really. Ideally, when you first implement your network, it should be qualified. And most companies have not done that in the past. So as you move forward, you need to go ahead and build and consider building a plan around how you're going to address that. getting a schedule around how you're going to address that, and then getting your processes and procedures for network qualification in place, and then following those procedures.
Thank you, Diane. Oh, last one here is not a question but a compliment from Mary. We're glad you enjoyed the session and glad the information was helpful for you. With that, I think we will close the session at this point, and we just so appreciate you taking the time to join us. It's it's a good thing. It's helping everyone to just understand even the questions that need to be asked out there and understanding the path to compliance. I would encourage you to join the community, participate in our discussions. You'll find on our LinkedIn U.S. Data Management group page there. We'll be entertaining and continuing to address questions there. Or if it's something of a confidential nature, please do send an email directly to me. It's rmeledy, M-E-L-E-D-Y, at usdatamanagement.com, and I can get answers and work through Diane as necessary there. And we're just open to that. We also appreciate your feedback. If there's something that you know would be more useful or helpful for you in the direction of our sessions, feel free to share that as well. We work seriously on continual improvement and appreciate any direction there. Also, if you have a topic, if you have something that you're struggling with on site and you just need direction from one of our practice leaders, a little insight or just a little more understanding, we're happy to hear that as well and work that into our session as appropriate. We do understand your time is valuable, so it's quite the compliment that you would join us, and we certainly appreciate the opportunity to team with you in working towards excellence in compliance. Have a wonderful day.